What's up, well, Mike Nowstalgia, Dave here with my 2025 XXL Freshman List predictions. I've been making these predictions for 9 straight years now. I do very well at this, get over 50% correct every year. So keep watching to find out who I expect to make the list. Of course, XXL Freshman has gone through quite the transformation culturally over the past, few years as the influence of traditional media in terms of breaking rap careers is less integral than it used to be. Artists are able to find success and find an audience using social media, using the internet. Easier access, in theory, to virality via TikTok and things of that nature. Being able to use distribution without signing, full major label record deals anymore. The game has changed, even if it's still a very competitive landscape. It's still hard to stand out. The artists I'm going to talk about are not dominant artists from a consumption standpoint, so I think the concept of a freshman in rap still makes a lot of sense. And hip-hop remains really the only genre that you could credibly make a list like this every single year. And even though on the high end, it feels like rap is in a bit of a static period as we're not breaking like new megastars all too much right now. We're in a quieter time. There's still a ton of stuff going on below the surface, underground, and just nascent artists that are popular only with people that are really paying attention, only popular with young people. So there's still, I think, a lot to really get into here, and a bunch of artists I think are quite good. I think this is still going to be a pretty good list, so we might as well just jump right in. So I'm going to go through everyone I think is in a contention here. Everyone I'm going to talk about is on XXL's website as someone you can vote for the 10th spot. So everyone I'm going to talk about is someone XXL themselves consider a freshman. I'm going to stick to that. It does not mean, they don't pick people outside of that list. That has happened before. And of course, it's not always an exact science. Artists decline the list for whatever reason, whether they feel like they got overlooked in a past year and are moved beyond the need for this now, whatever the reason is. There's a story history of artists that could have made freshman list a certain year and didn't pick it for whatever reason, right? So all those normal caveats still apply. We're going to jump through here and let's just kind of get into it. The funny thing is we're just going to start right off with Gelo because, in January 2025, I was not expecting to talk about LiAngelo Ball as a contender for XXL Freshman this year. But LiAngelo Ball, of course, older brother of Lonzo and LaMelo Ball of the NBA. Didn't work out for him with the basketball side of things, but kind of out of nowhere from the clouds, Gelo, as his rap name goes, released Tweaker, and Tweaker became the first rap hit of 2025 for sure. And now at this point it has 100 million streams, big co-sign with Lil Wayne remix. Gelo very quickly signed to Def Jam, performed at Rolling Loud last minute, performed at the NBA, All-Star Weekend. And most importantly, people like the song. It's a throwback song, the more 2000s vibes for sure. But people like the song. People think the song is good. People actually think that Gelo and his creative team actually have something here. And that's just not something we expected. So I think Gelo, whether he actually picks the, nomination and joins the list, something I could talk myself into either way with, to be honest. On one hand, he's already quite famous person. He actually comes across as pretty funny and charming if you watch his podcast appearances with Lonzo. Of course, he's already quite wealthy as well. So whether he feels like he needs this or not, I don't know. But on the other hand, I think it would make sense for him as a way to further legitimize his rap career. He only released, I think, 1 or 2 other singles since Tweaker, so he's of course very much a freshman with no project to his name. So I think he's worthy, and I'll just put him in whether he picks it or not. But I think Gelo, who's 26 years old, actually kind of on the older side, I guess, for the freshman criteria. But yeah, I think he'll go. I mean, still at this point, he's still at 4.7 million monthly listeners on Spotify. That's not the end all be all, but that's kind of the easiest metric to point to. So that's what I'm going to continue to cite. So yeah, Gelo from Los Angeles. Can't believe we're saying this, but that's what we're doing. Moving on, and I think everyone else from here on out, you would not really consider much of a celebrity, at least outside of, hip-hop circles, hip-hop head circles per se. But Gelo actually has a decent amount of normal fame, I guess. But yeah, moving on, I'm going to say Aaliyah's Interlude from Atlanta. Still only 21 years old, 2.1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Still an independent artist, but back in 2023, her song "It Girl" has now 168.5 million streams on Spotify. Massive song. I think it's kind of a bop, kind of a banger for sure. I'm a big fan of the track. She hasn't released all that much music though. No project still to her name. She did actually have an acting debut on FX's The English Teacher last year, but still quite young, still quite early in her career. But I think there's been enough buzz and enough early success with a song like "It Girl" that I think she makes a lot of sense, to be honest, and has enough, I think, core like technical rap ability that you see in a song like "It Girl" that like the fun, light nature of that song is not lost on anyone. So yeah, Aaliyah's interlude, Gelo, to start us off. I think both of them will make the list. Everyone else I'm going to talk about, I think, is like in the mix. Not everyone I'm going to mention, of course, is in my top 10. So next up, we have Basswag, 25 years old, from New York, specifically Queens. 957,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Basswag should stand out to you because he, of course, is the co-creator of Fisher, the Cash Cobain song, and he's on one or two other Cash Cobain songs. Of course, Cash Cobain, the face of sexy drill, the kind of latest iteration of drill. At least it was the latest iteration of drill last year, right? The thing with Basswag, though, is I don't know if he's really done enough and made a big enough name for himself to make the list, this year. The XXL has kind of like a, checkered history with like people that are kind of following one another, right? Like, I think of like Playboy Cardi made XXL like the year after a lot of his peers did, right? He didn't make it until 2017 after the famous 2016 list. Basswag, though, I feel like he's so connected to Cash Cobain, and Cash Cobain, of course, made the list last year. I'm not really sure if, because he doesn't have a standout like song of his own, And of course, Cash Cobain had so much influence as a producer and a creator and the face of a new subgenre, right? So I'm really sure about Basswag. New York, between Cash Cobain last year, Lola Brooke the year before, New York is a pretty steady presence on the list. If Basswag doesn't make it, though, I don't really think there's too many other true contenders, unfortunately, as much as I ride for New York. So, yeah, I'm going to have Basswag off the list, but certainly in the mix. Next up, we have BLP Kosher, 24 years old, from Florida. Florida, of course, Broward County specifically continues to be a hotbed for new faces, and a lot of people come up out of Broward. A lot of people flame out of Broward. Obviously, a lot of famous controversy, of course, in the last 8 years or so down there. But BLP Kosher, he's actually less popular than I thought. 850,000 monthly listeners. His biggest song, Special K, 42 million streams on Spotify. Signed to Encore Records. Has a bunch of projects out, 4 projects. I think he's kind of like a classic, like freshman. And his rapping style, I guess, vaguely reminiscent of someone like Babytron, I guess you could say. But yeah, I feel like you just see his name a lot recently, and he kind of makes sense as a freshman, and like especially of this moment. So I'm gonna go with him. Next up is Hanumankind. Of course, the oldest guy I'm gonna talk about on the list. He's 33 years old, from India. I believe he's now Houston-based. 9.2 million monthly streams on Spotify, monthly listeners. He is the most consumed artist I'm going to talk about because Hanumankind has the massive song Big Dogs from last year, 422 million streams. Got the big cosign with the A$AP Rocky feature and performed that with Rocky at Rolling Loud. And Hanumankind, he doesn't have any projects to his name, but it's kind of rapidly risen in fame, especially in India. He met Modi, for crying out loud. But honestly, like, Big Dogs, like, I think it blew people's mind because, he just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was like, he's a banger, like a great rapper for sure, right? And, the music video is very impressive as well, like, very much like a late bloomer, given there was no hype, really buzz around him. And I think he makes a lot of sense as someone to make this list because despite, the Big Dogs, numbers it's running up, I don't think Hanumankind is quite famous at all, and he doesn't have enough music to his name to not be considered a freshman still, despite his age. So I think he makes a lot of sense. He's a very exciting pick, to be honest. I really want to hear what's next from him, so I really hope they go with him. And, what is the history of Asian rappers from any country in Asia making the list? Is there even anyone? Really? There's not too many, at least. Of course, there are people they could have picked in the past that they didn't. Think of people 88 Rising, for example. The fact remains, though, there's not been an Indian guy on the list. That'd be pretty cool. All right, so that's Hanumankind. I have him in. So that gives us 3 people have in already. Next up is Ian. 19 years old, from St. Louis, 5.5 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Biggest song, Magic Johnson, 121 million streams. 2 projects to his name. I mentioned Ian, last year as someone I didn't expect to make it. And he's in the mix again. He's on their website. And Ian, of course, a white guy that uses crazy autotune and has very inauthentic lyrics. I think Ian sucks. I've always thought Ian sucked. He does have a level of popularity. I almost assumingly is completely white fans. But yeah, I think Ian sucks. And I think it's a bad message to pick a guy like him because he's just so clearly a fraud. But I would not be shocked if he made the list, honestly, because he continues to find success. He seems to tour pretty well. He has some songs that have run it up. So, on the merits, numbers wise, you could justify it. But I mean, I think from a curatorial point of view, which XXL does take into account, I don't think he's going to make it. Kind of reminds me of like when Bad Baby never made the list, same kind of thing. I just don't take him seriously, and I don't think XXL should either. If you like Ian, leave a comment. Let me know why you think he actually should make the list. But yeah, he's a no for me. Also a no for me is Caribou, 28 years old, from Atlanta, 1.1 million monthly listeners. I talked about Caribou last year as someone I actually thought should have made the list. And whenever they do this thing where like someone's on the on their voting list multiple years and never makes it, they never end up picking them. Like I picked Kenny Mason 3 years in a row, and they kept putting him as an eligible and then never picked him. Right, you got to move on at some point. And XXL doesn't really go back all that much. Also, Caribou, obviously like her big hit a few years ago was Box the 40. Kind of came up as being affiliated with Lil Yachty's Concrete Boys Collective. I think they've actually fallen out since then. But she hasn't made a whole lot of noise since last year when I mentioned her. And I actually think she's less hot now than she was before. So, yeah, I just don't think there's a good case for her right now, given who else she's competing with, to be honest. If she did make it, it's not a bad pick or anything like that. But I'm just not going to pick it this year. I don't expect it. Next up, I have Lazer Dim 7000, 23 years old, from Georgia. He has a bunch of projects to his name, just released one a few months ago. Only 1.9 million monthly listeners on Spotify. His biggest song, Laced Up, has 40 million streams. And I think probably the most high profile thing he's really done, though, is the Still in the Paint, Hard in the Paint cover freestyle song that Denzel Curry made. He has a feature on that. I'm not a huge fan of him by any means, but I do think he's pretty energetic and interesting enough, and still completely independent, which is pretty cool. Usually completely independent people don't make XXL, so perhaps that's a vote against him, but I think he's certainly in the mix, and I have him in, and I think he's someone to at least pay attention to moving forward. Someone else also in the mix for me is Lefty Gunplay, 30 years old, from LA County, 661,000 monthly listeners. Had a feature on OGZ's album recently, but of course, most well known for his feature on Kendrick Lamar's TV Off. TV Off, the second biggest song off GNX following Luther, right? I think Lefty Gunplay, who's not the only, relatively unpopular or underknown LA rapper on GNX, but he's probably the one with the biggest profile. And I think he's in the mix. I just don't know if there's quite enough outside of the Kendrick connection to get him through here, but I would not be shocked if he made the list. Someone I have definitely making the list is OsamaSon, 21 years old, from Charleston, 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Biggest song is Whole World is Free. He's got, I think, 4 projects at this point, too. OsamaSon, despite his young age, has, I think, really quickly built himself up as another player in the rage rap, plug rap, whatever the fuck you call it these days, descended from Yeet and Cardi before Yeet and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We always talk about this genre and how much it continues to evolve, and there's all these kinds of new faces, right? Last year, I mentioned someone, Net Spend, as someone in the mix, right? I mean, it's just such a vast genre. And I think Ken Carson, another famous face of this at this point. OsamaSon, I'm not a fan of this music. Obviously, it's heavily auto-tuned. You can listen to my Cardi review. Like I'm not really into this stuff, but it's quite popular, and I think he's the best pick to represent this subgenre of rap right now, and that subgenre should be represented if there's an eligible candidate, because I think that's one of the biggest and fastest growing and mutating versions of rap you have right now, to be honest. So I think OsamaSon makes a ton of sense. More my style would be Vaughn, 29 years old, from Long Beach, 609,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, just dropped his debut album last week. Vaughn is signed to Top Dog Entertainment, and the debut album has a J-Rock and Isaiah Rashad feature. I think he's actually linked up with Isaiah beforehand. Vaughn is pretty great. I think that song Trade Line from a few years ago is awesome. Doghouse is really good. He's very capable, very cool. And not that a TDE, being on TDE automatically gets you on the list, despite the fact that most rappers on TDE have made XXL Freshman. I think the only one that didn't make it recently was Reason, I think. But Doechii, of course, made it a handful of years ago. For the people who were paying attention, like myself, Doechii's now, rising star power was not completely unforeseen. Vaughn, I don't expect to become Doechii from a profile standpoint, but I do think he's quite good from everything I've heard. And I think he makes a ton of sense for this list as someone who, again, bit of a late bloomer, 29 years old, but doesn't have a whole lot of, music out there under his name yet. So I think he's a great pick. Someone I was a bit surprised to see on XXL's website was Rio de Young OG, who's 30 years old, from Flint, Michigan. Rio, he was, I think, incarcerated the last 4 years or so, but very much one of the faces, one of the most commonly cited names when you come to think of like the Flint specific sound and style of rap. But I just never really thought of him as a freshman, because he has so many projects at this point. It's like way too many to be considered freshman to me. And it's not that they don't pick older people sometimes, right? Late 20s, early 30s, right? I think of like Absol and Schoolboy Q's age when they made it, or Action Bronson. They do it from time to time. It depends, how the career went. But Rio, I just feel like he's not a freshman, and I think it's weird. Like, they include him, but I don't think they're going to pick him. I don't know. That's a weird one for me. I kind of struggled with like how to think about him as a freshman pick here. Next up, I have Skrilla, 25 years old, from Philadelphia, 2.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify, signed to UMG. Yeah, I think he's just kind of like a established, like, mid-tier new rapper, so to speak. He just feels like someone who's going to be on the list to me. Also in the mix is Xavier Sobeys, 21 years old, from New York, 612,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. I actually mentioned him last year, someone, kind of in the mix. But I feel like if you're going to pick OsamaSon, you're kind of market correcting Xavier Sobeys and don't really need to pick him. I just don't know if he's really like burst out of the shadow of his affiliation with like Netspend and things like that. So I don't know if there's a great case for him, especially because someone else kind of similar to him I'm going to pick instead, which would be Yapo JJ, 21 years old, from Alabama, 250,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but he has a ton of projects out. And he's someone I would love to see like XXL like kind of bet on and throw on there as someone quickly rising. So we'll see. And then lastly, I have 310 Baby from LA, only 19 years old, but 3.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify. His song Soak City has 220 plus million streams on Spotify, peaked at 53. And yeah, he seems like someone who's still quite young, but already has, a hit under his belt. Kind of a obvious pick to me. So those are the people I feel like are the most in the mix. Of course, there's dozens of other names on the website to consider, and I'm sure there's going to be someone on the list that I didn't mention just now. That's how it always goes, of course. But these are the people that immediately stand out to me as, people truly in the conversation here. So let me know who you think most makes sense to make the list, who you would like to see make the list, even if you don't think maybe they will. Let me know. And just to recap, here are my 2025 XXL Freshman List predictions. Gelo from LA, Aaliyah's Interlude from Atlanta, BLP Kosher from Florida, Hanumankind from India and Houston, Lazer Dim 7000 from Georgia, OsamaSon from Charleston, Vaughn from Long Beach, Skrilla from Philadelphia, Yapo JJ from Alabama, and 310 Baby from Los Angeles. Let me know who you think should make the XXL list this year. And of course, come back when the list does come out. I'll be reacting to who makes the list and analyzing that once we know. It usually happens in June. the June cover of the traditional XXL magazine. Then we'll get all the ciphers and the freestyles and the fun stuff there. So let me know who you think's in the mix. Come back when it's time to talk about the actual list itself. And of course, stick around if you like rap reviews. See the playlist below for all the projects I've reviewed recently. And I'll see you next time.